Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sanji Imura, and I'd like to thank you for watching the W2 Report. We have some special guests for you here tonight, or today, and let's go right into our guests and say hello, everyone. Uh, Today, let's introduce our guests one at a time before we go into the meat and potatoes of the discussion today. Uh, let's start with to my left on Discord. Uh, no, the other one. Yeah, my other left. Kuura, you're up first. Introduce yourself and tell us why you're cool.
Simply say that my name is Kuura Isagami. I run my own channel here on YouTube, the Medarot News Network. Basically, all I do is take whatever is the posted on the weekly on the official Medarot YouTube channel, and I just translate it into English for Western fans. So a lot of my videos and content are primarily just kind of short snippets and just my general opinions, I guess, on bots as they're released and whatnot. But I am looking forward to this conversation. I do thank you once again, Sanji, for having me.
Not a problem. Let's transfer the discussion into Mr. Colderjack. Who are you, and tell us why you're cool.
Okay, I mean, I'm primarily a Street Fighter player, but I was into Medabots a lot as a kid, and I've been getting back into it over the past year. Obviously, heard a lot about the current situation, what we're going to be discussing today, so hopefully I'll be able to bring something to the table. But yeah, thanks for having us, I guess.
No, not a problem. And last but not least is Caladori. Explain who you are and why you're cool.
Hello, the name is Caladori. I am the runner of the Medabots LLC Twitter. I am cool because my heating systems are not working. I'm very sorry. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Ani, your last. Explain to us who you are and why you're cool.
Mainly just big into Bitcoin, big in crypto, and helping people guide through the space as I see fit. Answering all the questions. Knowledge is power. Not a shit poster, but yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
No problem. And as always, our third man in the ring, Red Ray. Thank you for coming on once again, per usual.
Yeah, you're welcome, Sandra. It's always nice to be here on the W2 Report.
All right. So let's get started by going over a brief history of Medabots. If while we're looking at that, here is today's meme. Medamark, or how I stopped worrying and love crypto bros. Lisa is right on point per usual. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to start playing a video, and since since the guests are here, let's discuss it. Here's a brief little snippet of gameplay I asked for on Twitter, and I was like so gracious that people have turned up for presenting this information. So yeah, I'll turn it over to the Medabot expert and say let's go ham over it.
Well, anyone in particular that you think you'd want us to start, Sanji, or pretty much where we see fit?
Pretty much where you see fit.
Well, I guess the best way to describe it would be Medabots is kind of a slept-on series more than anything else, as in people will essentially know of it pretty well. And if you ask someone about it, they say, "Oh yeah, I know this series. I remember watching it or playing it as a kid." But that's about as far as it goes, and it's just kind of like I mentioned, slept upon. But basically, what it is kind of a cross between Pokemon and Custom Robo, where you can essentially mix and match different parts on a build in your team to help you develop a particular um, team build essentially to help fit the exact roles that you're looking for in battle. So say for instance, if you're looking for let's kind of break this into easier perspective. So like for instance, a standard JRPG. So of course you have your tank, your nuker, your fighter, your healer, and so on and so forth. But the nice thing is that with the way the Medabots was designed as mix and match, you can essentially multi-class different bots to suit different roles. So in this case, your defender, which would be primarily using a lot of shield-based attacks, can now use an ailment attack or a healing skill instead to kind of help spice things up and help you aid with coverage. Whereas in other JRPG or RPG type games, whatever role the character is assigned is basically what they're stuck with. So that's where essentially where the custom robo theme kind of fits into this, where you can mix and match everything that you're going off of. But ultimately, the series kind of started back in 1997 with the first Medarot on the original Game Boy, and from there it took off with another minimum, at least 4 titles on the Game Boy Color, on the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and then of course advanced to the Game Boy Advance with a remake of Medarot 2, and of course another slept-on title, which is Medarot Navi. From there, it kind of got slept upon some more, as at that point it was kind of localized, but didn't quite take off as well as I'm sure Imagineer had quite hoped. And as a result, the only games of the series that were largely localized and that everyone knows of is, of course, the game where the footage is playing right now, the anime, of course, which everybody knows and loves, and how everyone got a hold of it, and then a couple other handfuls of games, which unfortunately didn't quite do as well compared to the GBA gameplay that's being shown here. But again, it still does kind of contribute to the fact that, the series is known, it's not slept on or kind of forgotten or abandoned like people think it is. It's still there, it's still very prevalent, especially in Japan, as in with this a couple of years ago, back in 2020, when they released Medarot S for as a mobile game, as a way to kind of re-spark this series officially.
Right. So basically, what we have here is series that's generally slept upon here in the West. Do you know of any reason why it might have been slept?
I think one of the biggest reasons that at least comes to mind for me, and anyone else is more than welcome to refute this or verify it or stand with me. It's up to you guys. I think one of the biggest reasons is because it was kind of competing with Pokemon and even Digimon when it first came out, because they all kind of debuted roughly about the same time. So the whole Pocket Monsters thing was kind of it was kind of a trope that essentially everybody was trying to jump on the bandwagon for. And of course, Pokemon, Digimon, and Medarot all had their own different takes on how exactly they did it, and that kind of added to the individuality of each. The difference, however, is that again, because Pokemon and Digimon were backed by more prominent companies, more or less, they took off. Even Digimon, even though that one kind of was slept on for a while and then picked back up and down and kind of fluctuated here and there. Even those two had more of a community, essentially, both where it was debuted and when it was localized. So as a result, the Medabot series kind of got overshadowed and trudged over because they recognize, oh, it's a thing. But then when they look at Pokemon, they're like, oh yeah, this is totally it. This is the it thing. And it got kind of forgotten after a while.
Right.
And then, of course, we do have to remember the thing that folks do remember, the 3rd season of the anime, which a lot of folks in the Medarot community like to joke around as the controversial season that doesn't exist, quote unquote, because compared to the first 2 seasons, it wasn't, it didn't quite appeal the same way, and they didn't quite jump on the same plot line that the first 2 seasons really started on. So that kind of sunk it just a little bit, and then the one GameCube title that they did release also did not score very well and was not very well coded / assembled. So a lot of, I'm just going to say premature mistakes, I guess, for lack of a better term, or budget cuts, whatever the case may have been, did kind of contribute to Medabots kind of falling short in the West with the release of those 2 items, especially given the fact that what was localized was only a small handful of the games that where Japan basically had all of them, which includes Medarots 1 through 5, the 2 remake, and then Medarot Navi up to that point in time.
So wouldn't it be fair to say that there was multiple titles that were just essentially lost due to localization problems?
Correct. Pretty much the entirety of Medarots 1 through 5 were largely forgotten and not even touched when the series was officially localized. All we had officially were 2 Game Boy Advance titles, 3 technically if you count them as a 2-piece pair. The first of which was the Medarot 2 remake I mentioned, which a lot of people know it as Medarot 2 Core, or when it was localized, it was simply called Medabots RPG Adventure, Medabi, and Rokusho versions. The other games that we got was a spin-off of that one, which was called Medabots Axe, also called Medabi and Rokusho version, which was a 2D side-scroller combat game. Kind of similar to Street Fighter in that sense, where it's a 2D fighter, but a little more freedom in what you can do and where you can move around. And then the other game that we had was the GameCube title I mentioned, Medabots Infinity. That unfortunately did not hit as well with sales, and that one probably was one of the reasons that it did contribute to the series kind of falling in the Western front.
And if we combined the works that we essentially got, how much of a fraction of the story do we actually have here in the West?
Really, all we had was the story of Ikki Tenryo and Medabi, which was very well covered, or rather decently covered in the anime. So everybody knows, like I mentioned, Medabi. They all know Ikki Tenryo very well, and the general cast that was premiered in there. But really, what happened is the Medabot 2, the 2 remake, essentially that Game Boy Advance, was meant to be a retelling roughly of the story of Medarot 2. So out of all the stories that we had, because each title essentially had its own protagonist and series, we only had one actual story. And then touching on that as well, of the first 5 that were released, Medarot 1, of course, is the one that started it all. Folks that watch the anime will know the character rather well as Hikaru Agata. Medarot 1 basically centers around him and his adventures with the original Metal Beetle, essentially. Just kind of getting the ground wet and kind of setting the stage for how exactly the world of Medabots works.
Okay.
2 through 4 touches on the story of Ikki Tenryo and Medabi. So the iconic characters that everybody knows from the game and the anime, 2 through 4 covers them. And then 5 is a completely separate protagonist, unrelated, named Koichi Maru, and the adventures of him and his partner, either Kodojo or Shinzan, depending on game version.
Okay. So essentially what we have here is lots and lots of plot missing, but what we do have is yes, we should. So explain to me what game is on the screen here.
The one that's on the screen being played is the Medarot 2 remake I mentioned, called Medarot 2 Core, or in English, the Medabots RPG Adventure. This one, like I mentioned, was basically just supposed to be a loose retelling of what happened in the original Medarot 2. The primary differences between this one and the original 2 is that when they made this one, they were trying to showcase the higher functions and advanced mechanics that the Game Boy Advance at that time could handle compared to the Game Boy or the Game Boy Color. So, of course, the sprites were a lot more interactive and engaging, more detail behind them. The ultimate cost primarily to that was that they took out a lot of bots from the original Medarot 2 roster that were more or less redundant. So, say for instance, Land Motor and Land Rotor. A lot of folks from the anime know Land Motor, the card type, pretty well, but he actually had a upgrade version called Land Rotor, essentially, that you could find in Medarot 2. And he was the actual card type you could get in that game, and you had to get Land Motor by essentially trading in from a copy of Medarot 1. But when they remade Medarot 2 for the Game Boy Advance, they kind of crunched the roster down and got rid of a lot of bots, like I mentioned, that were considered redundant.
So, just a little bit on instead of going too much into the story with this question, I'm going more in the series as a whole. So the games are more of a type of innovative and a series meant to show off the ability for the consoles that it was made for, instead of like just some random extra game. It's a series that was trying to make the console do as much as it could while also being an interesting topic.
Correct. That basically, like I mentioned, the 2 core for Game Boy Advance was designed to remake and kind of retell the story of the original 2, but also do it on a stronger engine and showcase that it was on a stronger engine.
Okay. Now, this here. If the rest of the guests would chime in on this, if you can, what if we had our choice, what version would you recommend us playing as new players into the Medabot series?
I think pretty much. Well, I mean, it depends where you're from. I guess if you can't read Japanese, then obviously the remake of Medabots 2. I think out of the 3 games that we got outside of Japan, only one of them was like a sort of mainline game. The Medabots AX and the GameCube game are sort of like spin-offs, so it's not really indicative of like the series as a whole. Whereas with 2 Core, I think it's a pretty solid game in its own right as well.
Absolutely, and it still is a very iconic game, essentially, that brought a lot of folks in. And if it wasn't the game, it was definitely the anime that brought a lot of the community together.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think Core 2 is like legitimately a good game in its own right, so it's like one thing it has going for it. Whereas with AX and Medabots Infinity, I probably wouldn't really bother with those unless you're like really into Medabots franchise.
The really great thing too, honestly, and I just want to point this out briefly, is even 2 Core the remake follows a lot of the same in-game mechanics and battle style as the original games. So a lot of things that I tell folks that are want to try to branch out and try some of the JP titles is if you can play 2 Core and understand how to play it and how it works, you can essentially play any of the first 5 games relatively easily, since they all basically follow the same format.
Okay. So essentially, because they are in the same engine / console era, they can be played relatively easy without a translation guide, for example.
The Medarot 1 through 5, of course, you will probably want to have a translator or translated guide on hand, because of course they are in Japanese. But if you kind of read past the language and kind of just play the game for its mechanics, if you play 2 Core, you can play any of the first 5 relatively easily, since again they follow the same mechanics.
Okay.
Yeah, there is actually a English translation for the first Medabots game.
Absolutely, and it's actually good that you brought that up, Golkar. We actually do have a fully fan-translated version of Medarot 1, so there is definitely another option for folks that want to get into the series or see where it officially began.
Yeah, I mean, like any first game in a series, it's pretty rough around the edges, but it's still like a lot of fun, especially if you've been playing 2 Core for like the past 20 years.
Proof of concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Medabots started in 1997, correct?
Correct.
When did the original publishers of the Medabot games basically give up the West?
I'd say roughly about the same time that the GameCube game was released, Medabots Infinity, which would be roughly about 2003.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think a game called. I think maybe we should have mentioned this earlier, that there was a game called Shingata Medarot that I think might have had something to do with it.
Yeah, that was on the JP front primarily, but there was
Yeah.
another
Watch the
spin-off,
series.
lack of a better term, called Medarot Shingata. That was just meant to be another case of showcasing the stronger GBA engine of the time, kind of like
Yeah,
how
used-
Medarot 2 Core was, but they remade all of the sprites into a very how should I put this nicely? Artistically unique
Well,
approach.
I think even in Japan, the series kind of faded briefly into obscurity after that game came out because it wasn't very well received.
What I find
Right.
hilarious about that, though, is Mr. Haru Marin, who is the creator of the
Yeah.
Medarot series, essentially, says that Shingata was one of his favorite titles.
What the? These sprites look so weird.
It was that's why I said, how can I put it nicely? It was very artistically unique choices.
I mean, it's
Was it
unique.
made?
But
It's unique, but
at
from
what
having
cost?
yeah.
Was it made by the same studios though?
I think so.
Shingata, I believe, was one of the primary developers that they had, and publishers that was working with them to that time was Rocket Company or Natsume. A lot of people who play 2 Core will know Natsume and believe they were the developers. Natsume was primarily just the publisher that helped them localize the title. Rocket Company was one of the other developers that Imagineer worked with releasing titles for the game.
Interesting.
Now, can you explain? I don't want to go into too far in the Redux, into the material that we set aside for the Redux episode of Medamark, because we are going to do that tomorrow at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern. But can we isolate why Medarots kind of went off into the wayside as far as IP rights are concerned?
I think the biggest way to sorry, go ahead.
I think I phrased it poorly, so I think I phrased my previous question poorly, so I was like, I'm trying not to discuss the current drama into the situation, but can we have an idea on why Medabots is so fractured as far as the number of companies are concerned?
I think the biggest thing that would attribute to it is, of course, the fact that the series basically went radio silence for a solid 10 years. Actually, more like 7 years actually. Between the fall off of the anime and Medabots Infinity on the GameCube, and when the series essentially picked back up on its own in 2010, back in Japan, and picked up from there. But even then, on the Japan front, the reason why the series remained particularly niche was because its sales didn't quite reflect as well as they'd hoped. And when I did look at a couple of the gross revenue charts as each title was released, this includes the Medarot 7, 8, and 9 on the 3DS, including the spin-offs on there, Medarot Duel and Medarot Girls Mission. It was kind of like a progressive fall, not like a total drop-off in terms of gross profit, but it was like a progressive fall, essentially, between each progressive title that was released, compared to, I believe, it was Medarot 3 or Medarot 4 that was considered the most popular of all time and had the highest grossing sales.
Okay. So basically, the people who have forgotten about it, essentially, right?
To a degree. Like I mentioned before, if you ask someone off the street, especially a fellow nerd, say, hey, have you heard of Medabots? They'll say, not quite sure, what's it about? But then you show them a picture of Medaby, their eyes will suddenly light up and go, oh my gosh, I know this character! And they start going this tirade saying, I knew all about this guy, I didn't know who you were talking about before, what the name of it was. So it's not like the community itself has died and gone, as a lot of people may think it has. It's just been a very largely slept-on series that just didn't get as much time in the spotlight as Imagineer had hoped.
Ah, I see. So essentially, what we have here is a kind of niche series, and it's been largely forgotten. Is that fair to assume?
That's definitely a good way to put it. It's a very forgotten niche series.
uh, sorry, folks. We're experiencing some extracurriculars at chat.
So I'm just curious here. What was the last thing that Imagineer produced for the IP? Is this going to be looking like?
That would be Medarot S for for mobile devices back in 2020, and roughly about the same time, probably just a little bit before, a little bit after, They released what was called Medarot Classics Collection Plus, which was essentially kind of like how Nintendo and Sega did those classic collections with, putting all their old games on one engine. That's basically what Medarot did in this case. On the 3DS, they had Original Classics Collection, which was just 1 through 5. Of course, with the unified library and everything. But then, not long after S was released, they released the Classics Collection Plus for the Nintendo Switch, which included the first 5 games and a bunch of the other ones that was not included in the original classics. So that included other ones such as Medarot Navi, the 2-core that everybody knows and loves, in Japanese, of course, and I think a couple other titles that were left out of it.
So were these ports or were they remasters or?
Primarily, they were just ports.
Okay.
How many distinct games are in the series?
Elaborate on distinct, like genre, type of gameplay.
How
Yeah,
many unique games that aren't remasters or
Oh,
collections?
okay. Quite a few actually, because aside from 2-core, 2-core Axe, also known as G on the Japanese version, Infinity, and Duel and Girls Mission, a lot of the titles are actually entirely all mainstream. The only title that was not officially numbered was Medarot DS back in 2010, which more or less kind of takes the role of Medarot 6 in this case. So if you exclude all spin-offs or remakes, and if you also exclude the Classics Collection or Medarot S, you have 9 full mainstream titles.
And with the spin-off games?
With the spin-offs, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. I want to say roughly about 8 further titles. 9 if you include the
Yeah.
mobile game.
So yeah, it's a good chunk of games since in the last 24 years you have
Indeed.
about 16,
In
17
fact,
games.
In fact, this month actually on 11/28 is what a lot of folks in the community are calling Medarot Day, because that was the day that the first Medarot game was launched, Medarot 1, back in 1997. So
Oh,
on the
that's
on the front for Medarot S, they're definitely amping up on that excitement, with a lot of events or showcasing a lot of models coming out, and they're teasing this big live stream, I think closer to the day, with some huge news, quote unquote, that they're going to live stream it for like a 24-hour stream thing. They're keeping real quiet about it, of course, but it's just coincidental and amazing that this discussion takes place so close to the birthday that celebrates Medarot's 24 years.
So essentially, if anyone is interested in this is essentially a perfect time to get into the series and try to interact with the community, learn more, and basically follow the hype as things develop, and just
Absolutely,
everyone can enjoy things together.
Absolutely, especially on the Western front too, where a lot of folks again kind of see the series has kind of been slept on or kind of forgotten. I did mention before on my channel, I do take a lot of the stuff they post on their official one and just break it into English. So I kind of help bridge that gap more or less for folks that want to know what's going on or want to kind of play the game with the Japanese community but just don't know where to start. That does also include a lot of guides that we've helped write that kind of break everything down. So if someone wanted to learn how to play the mobile game, for instance, I've got a Google Doc set up as a read-only that basically breaks down every menu, what all the terms are, what you're looking for, how to build a team, what all these different features and events are for. We basically cover all that. It's basically a bridge for the Western community to know what's going on, so they too can join in on the fun.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, and let's hope that something interesting can come to the Western market soon. Then
we're keeping our fingers crossed. They've made mention of us a number of times as a community, but unfortunately, with rising circumstances and such, it just kept getting put on the back burner.
Yes, and unfortunately, this is only just a scrape in. This is only a scrape into the dirt of what Medabots actually is. Is this fair to it? Is this a fair assessment?
Well, if I'm being entirely honest with you, I could go on for hours and hours, but I'm pretty sure you guys don't want that. But yeah, basically just kind of summarizing it, that essentially is it. Medabots is a JRPG series that kind of follows the pet robot, pet monster kind of mechanic in its own unique way, but then the mix and match mechanics that are also applied kind of take that RPG mechanic and spice things up, so you can basically make the ideal team that has all the roles that you want exactly where you want them, so you can maximize your coverage and leave as few holes in your team as possible if you build your team right.
Okay. I guess that will do it for part 1, I believe, unless we have any final thoughts from our panel.
I might start playing them. That seems pretty amazing. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's and especially with the live streams coming up, it might at least be interesting to take a look at and at least talk more to the community.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think if you decide to play Core 2, I'd be careful because it gets pretty difficult. The game doesn't really explain mechanics very well.
I mean, if I can manage XCOM with a 99% chance to hit and fail and still beat the game, I think I can do this.
Yeah, that was something else that kind of hurt the series too. Is even though they took basically 2 core and localized it, they kind of forgot how to explain how to play. They basically teach you the basics of course, choose a skill. That's what you're going to use on your turn. They're going to run to the line, take their turn, and then run back to get their next order. But they didn't quite take the opportunity to explain to you exactly how it worked. And they basically relied on the internal flavor text that explained each of the skills. So it was you were kind of running blind essentially. So newcomers or even anyone who played 2 core who has never played a Medarot game in the past essentially will play it entirely blind and have no idea what they're doing because it was not very well explained.
Yeah, and I think would it be a fair assessment if we say that also helped in the downturn of Medabots as a whole in the West?
To a degree, I guess it would contribute just a little bit. The spin-off Medarot Axe was a little easier to understand because instead of getting flat numbers, essentially, they would basically give it a level rank between a letter rank between A and F. A, of course, being greatest, F, of course, being not so great. So it was a little easier to understand in that front because it was just strictly fighting, and there was not as many mechanics to understand or learn. The GameCube game kind of took off in its own direction too, which also made it stand out, which also didn't contribute to better understanding the series or its mechanics, because all 3 games basically took the same thing and went 3 separate directions with them.
Okay, fair enough. I guess we are approaching the end of Medamark, the first video. Do we have any final thoughts from our panel before we go?
None here. None to me.
None in particular that I could mention.
Okay. And I'm sure I'm going to catch flack for it, but if you have any questions for our Medabot experts, please drop them in the comments below, and I will be sure to get them to whoever is necessary, and we will go from there. Until then, I'd like to thank our guests for joining us today.
Thank you again for having me, Sanji. It was a blast.
And we will be back for Medamark Redux tomorrow at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern. This will be a YouTube premiere. So if you would, please join us for that. And I will see you guys soon on the next W2 report.
The end of the fight.